You all heard that. It is being recorded. So again, there's my Twitter handle. If you want to follow me on Twitter, feel free to do so. My email address is mford, F-O-R-D, at murrayk12.org. If you want to send me an email, I'm here to help. We've been a STEM designated school since 2019, and we enjoy the work. I'm very passionate about this myself. I may get to talking fast. I get so excited and passionate about this work, but probably what I'll do is hold questions for each attribute until we get finished with that section. And then the only other thing for attendees, if you could make sure you're muted, that will just help with background noise. So if you can mute yourself, that would be helpful, and we will get rolling. All right, so starting out talking about professional development, attribute 3. And I won't read this to you. I'll be quiet for a minute or so you can read this screen, but I'll pull out a couple of important tidbits for you. So I think as you maybe finish up reading, the important part with professional development, when you think about that in a STEM school, a couple of key pieces I think of here, and we'll look at this more in depth in the rubric in a second. But when you're thinking about professional development, I like to call it professional learning because we're all learning together. Even though I'm the instructional leader in my building, I'm still learning right alongside my teachers and our staff. And I think that's an important mindset to maintain as the principal or whatever leadership position you're in your school. And then I think this piece with short-term and long-term goals, thinking about where are we at currently in the journey and how is this learning piece going to get us to our long-term goals and help us sustain this process as we go. You'll see when we look at the rubric that it can vary. Professional learning can vary. And there's some things to keep in mind with too, because there's a lot of traveling salesmen out there wanting to get products in your building, get people in your building, and it may not always be what you need. So be sure you've got a very critical eye when you're looking at these things. You can see here quality STEM or STEAM professional learning aligns with the initiatives, and it's provided throughout the year to support the school STEM action plan. So if you go back to attribute 1, that action plan that you're supposed to have in place, all of these components should correlate to that. It's not just random things. Ooh, that sounds cool. Ooh, that sounds fun. There's going to be a lot of that stuff out there, but going back to that action plan and really being strategic with how you're implementing this, how you're capitalizing maybe with other schools in your district that are going through the process, that's always a good way you can pile your money together and maybe get a bigger bang for your buck. And then also thinking about free resources that are out there. But when we actually tie it to the rubric, you can see what I hear: early, developing, accomplishing, and model. I always like to look at model because that's where we all want to be, right? We all want to do the absolute best work we could do. But it's also important to think about early and developing, because right now you might be in a developing stage. So what have you got to do to get over to model? So I'll let you look at that for a second, and then we'll talk through it. So if you look at the model category, you can notice some of the differences. And again, remember, when you're going through designation and you're actually being scored, the evidence you send in and things like that, 90% is the goal. Remember that with each one of these categories, you want to hit 90% in all the indicators. So with model, I think with this one, some of the harder ones to hit: teachers observing colleagues and engaging in formal reflection and discourse regarding practice. A lot of times it's easy for us to set up those teacher observations as a leader in our building. But a lot of time, from my experience, what gets dropped off is that reflection and conversation after the fact. So maybe you have plenty of opportunities to go in and observe your peers, but as the leader, are you setting up opportunities for those observations to have that conversation after the fact? That conversation piece, that reflection piece after the fact, is where growing is going to occur. It's where you're going to see changes in practices. So be sure when you're planning these things that you're thinking about that piece, because that gets missed a lot. it can be a challenge sometimes to embed it in the working day, but think about if you go back to attribute one with your scheduling, think about how you're crafting that schedule, maybe your collaborative planning time. So again, you start seeing how all these different components work together. I think really the rest of these are kind of more self-explanatory. Making sure it's aligned with your STEM and STEAM initiatives, that's important. You may have other things your district requires you to do, and you got to try to figure out how to dance around those and navigate those things as you go through this process. If you're not sure where to start with professional development, I would start with TSIN. Go to their website. They have a ton of resources on there that will help with professional development. I know TSIN as a office, as a group, they will come out and work with your school or your district too. So there's a ton of resources available there, free. Start there, and then it can grow. Let's keep on trucking. Looking at evidence, you can read this yourself. I don't like to read slides to people. I like to try to hit the highlights. You've probably figured that out. So I kind of let you read a second, then I'll talk a little bit more. So with this one, I think some of the key words, it's evidence for all STEM or STEAM teachers. So you've got to figure out in your building, like we're a pre-K4 school. I expect all of my teachers to have some knowledge of STEM or STEAM in their classroom. So you could see some of these going on in any classroom in the building. We've had a dedicated STEM teacher before. We don't have that this year, but I've always had the expectation about building capacity in all of my classrooms so everybody can work on being a STEM teacher. That does go back to the professional learning. Since I have that expectation, I've got to be sure that I'm providing quality things for the teachers to grow in different areas. This thing likes to skip sometimes. Sorry about that. So you can see that PBLs, whether you call them project or problem-based learning lessons, collaborative planning practices, how do all those things come together to improve the learning experiences in your school for your students? We'll go to the next slide that it's skipped to. And then you can also see how the professional learning will change some of the instructional practices. You can read those bulleted points, just different suggestions for evidence. Then the last piece with evidence is here. And when you're thinking about submitting this evidence, you'll see some examples in a second, but like everybody's probably got agendas and notes in some way. So that's an easy one. When you get into some of this other stuff, like participating in a job embedded or practice-based approach, TSIN offers opportunities for this all the time. We've got several teachers here. Kristen, you may have to help me with the wording, but I know we've got 3 teachers that are in the rural leadership with TSIN right now. And then I've got 2 other teachers that are in a newer thing, the Workforce Development Initiative that TSIN offered. So those are all job embedded trainings through TSIN that we were fortunate enough to have people accepted to participate in. They had to apply like everybody else. It's a very rigorous process, but it's bringing back a lot of good stuff to our school. So the way we capture evidence of those things, obviously we can have a narrative that supports that, but we can also have photos. So if your school's on social media, a lot of times I think that's where schools miss opportunity to collect evidence. You know, pictures that'll quote, pictures tell 1,000 words. It's very true because we're big on Twitter here, hashtag buzzworthy. And if you were in the first session, you heard me say this, but hashtag buzzworthy is our hashtag here, you know, and so we use that on Twitter and we can catalog a ton of evidence and then we can go back and see that and we can write narratives that go along. So sometimes we're doing things day in, day out and we forget about it. But here you'll see just examples from an unnamed school, different ways they've captured evidence of different things related to professional learning. I don't think I can click on any of these and make them bigger, but you can see how they've captured different things with Zoom meetings or professional development plans for the total school. This larger one you can see here is just how they've captured the different professional learning sessions, professional development sessions that they've utilized with different staff members and different professional groups. So just think about, as you're going through this, practices you already have in place, and just know you don't necessarily have to recreate the wheel or make things new if there's already practices you've been using. Think
And
about
I'm gonna jump in real quick, Dr. Ford, just to add a little bit before we move into designing PBLs. So when we think about quality of professional learning, Dr. Ford mentioned a couple of our cohorted programs. We do have several cohorted programs, and what that means is that they're application based. They typically range from about 45 to 30 educators that are accepted into the program. We try to be really diligent in making sure that we accept an equal number of educators across the 3 major regions of the state. So we do have the Rural STEM Collaborative, we have the STEM Workforce Fellowship, and then we just launched a computer science ILI. We have a school counselor ILI, and then we have just the original ILI, and ILI stands for Innovative Leaders Institute. So those are typically geared toward a principal and an assistant principal, or a principal and a lead teacher, and they go through that together to really kind of strengthen those STEM practices that are happening within the building. We also have our professional learning series, which is really just, that's where we just cater to your building and the needs that you have for your staff. The professional learning series is still a free opportunity that we offer. There's tons of different session topics, and you simply fill out the form on our website, and we reach out and get you scheduled for a particular session that fits your needs there. And then the other piece to that too, if you'll go back one slide for me, Dr. Ford, just back to the examples. When you're looking at this table, you'll also see that there's a STEM hub training listed on there. We have 8 hubs that are strategically placed across the state to help support local counties. So I definitely highly recommend that you look up our STEM hubs on our website to see which STEM hub is closest to you. They have ongoing PD throughout the year. They also have lending libraries where you can check out free stuff. So that is another opportunity that's boots on the ground, a little bit closer to home. Hopefully they're within a couple of hours. And a lot of hubs have the option to actually bring you the stuff if you were to check something out, or to meet you halfway. So definitely take the opportunity to check out which hub is closest to you. And I'll get off my soapbox.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. The leadership program through TCEN, I went through that in 2019 with our assistant principal, and it's high quality. It's rigorous. It's very good. And then I don't have to repeat what Kristen said. She articulated that very well, but do take advantage of the resources and opportunities. Anytime something comes open for application, I encourage our entire staff to apply. If I have 60 people or 50 people apply, at least maybe we'll get one person in, if nothing else. So just kind of think about that, however that works for your school and your staff. Shifting into the second component of this attribute with designing PBLs, you can read this. As you're reading, I think what I would say here, just for the sake of time, pay attention to this last part that's underlined: research challenges within the community. I know some schools I've worked with going through designation as a coach, they sometimes want to create problems that may not exist just so we can do a PBL. Try not to do that. Think about how you can serve and how you can help your teachers think about things that will serve your classroom or serve your building, or maybe serve a community partner. I know one of the projects we had here way early on back in 2018, we introduced 3D printing to our school. And so being an elementary school, that's not necessarily a typical thing to do. We had the micro 3D printers. They were a little bit more age appropriate. And so the way I really tried to build inertia with that, with our leadership team, I set up a school-wide challenge about who could come up with a problem in the building that we could utilize this new technology to solve. We pulled in some different standards because the standards are components of this. You'll see that. But ended up our 4th grade group, even though they're the oldest, they still won the first micro 3D printer because they worked with the cafeteria staff. The cafeteria staff was running short on measuring spoons and measuring cups and needed new ones. And the kids found that out. So there was a lot of research that went into that. Would the plastic be safe? With this, with that? How do we design, a cup versus half a cup versus quarter cup? So it was really cool the work the kids did. Our kindergarten group came along right after them, thinking about we needed, and I didn't know this until they told me, but we needed the like your wall outlet safety plugs that you plug in so the kids don't stick stuff in the wall outlets if they're not being used. That one we couldn't do because the plastic wasn't safe, fire hazard. But anyway, kind of gives you an idea of that. That's a very rudimentary. If you've got middle school, high school, there's a lot more, I think, flexibility there than you necessarily always run into with elementary. But anyway, looking at the rubric for attribute 3.2, if you go to model, again, that's the column I always try to start with. And you can kind of see how it goes from maybe isolation to collaboration with these. And then how you're pulling in different community partners to help with this. And Kristen, you may correct me, but I do know that with the PBL piece, the presentation of your learning used to be a really big part of this component. I think it probably still is, because anytime you can give your kids an opportunity to talk about what they're learning to whoever they're helping, it can go a really long way. And then the 21st century learning skills, what I would encourage you with this one, make sure you're clicking this link and seeing what skills we're looking for or what skills TSEN's looking for. There's if you're a research person, you'll know there's a ton of different versions of 21st century learning skills out there. So just make sure when you go in this rubric that you're following the right one. And again, this will be available later, but I can click it and just show you what they're going with. It's through Battelle for Kids. And that way you just kind of know the framework that we're looking for with 21st century learning. Because if you just Google 21st century learning skills, it can bring up lots of different things, and it may not all be high quality.
Yeah, and this is really a crucial component, of the application when we're looking at this as a whole. Our PBLs really get folded into a lot of the work that we display and showcase throughout the application. So this piece is truly about making sure, one, that our teachers feel supported and confident in building out rigorous and high quality PBLs. So it really is making sure that our teachers do have that professional development, whether you get it through us or you get it through someone like PBL Works or Buck Institute. Those are two other big ones that, develop a high quality PBL training. We have a PBL template on our website, under making sure that teachers understand the different components of what a PBL looks like, and truly understanding the difference between project-based and problem-based. Project-based we see a lot of at the elementary level. And that's typically where students are all kind of working towards the same product, whether that's, for example, that they're all, working towards building a bridge. They might all be building a different type of bridge, but essentially they're all building the same thing. And problem is where we, literally assign the students a problem, and all groups are going to come up with a different solution. So understanding the difference of those two as well.
Thank you. I realized it wasn't sharing what I pulled up, what I clicked on, so I apologize. But that link will take you to Battelle for Kids. And Kristen mentioned, it used to be Buck Institute. I think it's PBL Works now, but they've got a lot of really good stuff, like Kristen said. So you can see other components of evidence with this, the culminating project piece. And then here's an example. It's kind of, I think what this one is, and correct me if I'm wrong again, Kristen, I'm sorry, but this looks like where schools have cataloged their different PBLs, and then they've got photo evidence or narrative to support that down here. So just kind of an example of how you could capture evidence and share it when you're going through designation. I would also think too, the important piece with evidence, I've not said that on this presentation, but it's one thing to catalog this and share it, but when you actually have your site visit, having evidence of this in place when the site visit occurs. So it may not necessarily be students participating in a PBL that day, but do you have after effects of the artifacts, or do you have some type of way the learning is being captured and displayed longstanding in your building? Characteristics here, the culminating work piece, again, this kind of summarizes things we've been talking about. And on this slide, I'll stop for this attribute and just kind of open it up for any questions around PBL. And we can kind of bounce through that. So if you want to, you can either use the raise your hand option on Zoom, or if you want to just unmute and ask me, we can do it either way. If you have any questions about this attribute. Not seeing any questions. Right. We'll move on then to the next attribute and talk about achievement. So if you want to read this for a second, this is attribute 4. And I think the important one with this, when you think about achievement, don't confuse this with like TN Ready and TVOS and all that good stuff. That can be part of this, but it's not what we're talking about here in this particular attribute. So just keep that in mind as we work through this. You can see here performance assessments. And I'll let you read. I won't read it to you. Okay. So with this one, do pay attention to all the underlined words: strong, innovative, and cohesive. You're looking at this through rubrics. And so some of those resources we've already talked about. It used to be the Buck Institute. I think it's PBL Works now. I may be wrong on that, but still the same place. Our school, we kind of have 4 cornerstones with our STEM work, and how we teach kids to use rubrics for self-assessment as they work through any of their academics really is a big part. That's one of our cornerstones. And the rubrics we use for that, the teamwork rubric, the collaboration rubric, those did come from what used to be Buck Institute. I think it's PBL Works now. I don't think I'm wrong on that. But we modified those rubrics to fit our culture and our building. But when you think about it, tying back to work-based learning and how you're giving kids opportunity to demonstrate their learning through those rubrics, it's really important to have a cohesive, as it says, rubric system in place that is showing similar learning across classrooms throughout the grade levels. I think we build that language up here in kindergarten, and then the kids just compound on it as they progress throughout the school. So that's why that's one of our cornerstones. You can see on the rubric here what a model school would look like with this particular piece. You can read these if you want. I think these two, especially the students participating in self-evaluation and goal setting consistently, that can be hard, especially that self-evaluation piece, but building that in to become a regular practice in your building is really crucial. Your teachers can lose track of that. I mean, we're not operating off of plates anymore. We're working out of boxes. We've got so much onus we have to do. But as the leader in your building, the more you can build these practices in and encourage your people to work through them, the better it's going to serve you in the long run. Student dialogue too, I think if you can build that cohesive rubric up in your building, the dialogue should automatically come from that rubric. So teaching the kids how to use the rubric, what the different components mean. Here in our building with kindergarten, first grade, that's a lot of what you see, how those rubrics are used. We're just teaching the kids what they mean, what they look like. And it's simple. You have to think about what's appropriate for the age group you work with. So high school can be a lot more complex than this. Kindergarten, you've got to teach them how to do school and then teach them how to work with other kids. And then is that successful or not? So our goal here is by the end of the year, when they leave kindergarten, can they have those conversations? Can they identify if whatever project or opportunity they went through, did they have success working collaboratively with other kids in that, based on that rubric? So, and you can kind of, you can see the difference early. you're focusing more just on that statewide data. But when you get in here, you've got other data that's driving the work you're doing. So again, sometimes I know schools can get caught in, oh no, I'm a level 1 school, this isn't going to work, I'm not going to make it. If you're just talking TCAP, that's not going to hamstring you here. So just keep that in mind. It's part of it, but I just want to make sure everybody understands that difference there. Is there anything with this you want to say, Kristen?
I was looking for a specific piece talking about, just wanted to provide you with an example of some different types of rubric. I can't remember what is on the actual sample piece of evidence for this, but there are tons of examples out there when we think about an elementary rubric or a middle school rubric or a high school rubric. At that elementary, we see a lot of whether the rubric is done by colors and students are taught what a specific color entails, or whether it's done with smiley faces or emojis or anything like that. But it's still that students understand that they're using this rubric to assess their group work, to assess their self. Those accompany PBLs and really help students understand, one, that the design process is that recursive nature. So it kind of hits back on 2.2, which is the engineering design process. And that is a big piece of that reflective piece really has stuff to do here. But as you can see, just looking at this evidence sample, there are tons of different things that you can showcase for this. I'm a firm believer that here in Tennessee that we are driven with data. I feel like we have data coming out of our ears of different things that we can use. Just looking at this specific school that was pulled from, I mean, you can see that there are surveys, there are rubrics, there are data conferences, there are report cards, there are KWL charts. So there are numerous different things when you think about putting evidence together for this piece.
Yeah, and some of those other evidence things you might want to consider here. I skipped over these. But the fun piece with this is you can have a variety of different things that are used for how assessment, how data is driving the work you're doing. With kindergarten, the specific rubric we use does have the smiley faces on it. That just resonates better with the younger kids. And then by the time they get second grade or higher, we transition to a more traditional rubric, more words on the page, that you would expect. But, there's portfolios, group projects, and again, photos are a great way to capture evidence. That way you can show real time kids collaborating, working together, how they're utilizing the rubric, and just that narrative piece along with those photos. This page has got some other things. Data walls, that's probably something everybody's doing in some capacity. So how do you build a STEM component into that? How do those data walls reflect what's occurring in the STEM environment? And again, your schedules, a lot of the evidence will cover multiple indicators or multiple attributes. So keeping up with all this stuff digitally in some shared space that everybody or certain people, I guess your key people, your leadership team have access to is really important. If you're trying to do all this yourself, it can be very, very taxing. So that team component, that leadership team supporting you, we talked about back in attribute 1 is so important. So nobody gets burned out with this work. So we looked at the evidence piece here, the example, and then we'll shift into 4.2, which is accountability data. You can read that real quick, just the descriptor of what accountability data is. And we'll jump to the rubric. So with 4.2, a lot of yellow words on this page. I would pay attention to those because that will kind of differentiate early to model and the different things that has to happen. And I think for us, just to jump to the model category here, what's worked really well is we're very well aware of our standardized test data. I think everybody, like Kristen said, everybody's very data driven. We have to be in the environment we work in these days. But for us, how do we respond to that data with opportunities that is going to enhance and enrich learning for kids? I don't believe in a test prep factory, worksheet after worksheet after worksheet, preparing them for the end of year test. I know some schools have to operate that way, and I've been fortunate we haven't had to do that yet, but we're able to think about those highly assessed standards, and how are we giving kids opportunities daily to interact with those standards, that content, that learning in a way that's still going to prepare them for that traditional test at the end of the year. Some years we do better on that than others, and I think everybody would be in that boat. I mean, that's just kind of the system we work in. But also, this is going to deal with how your teachers are responding to that data. So not just you or your leadership team, but how is every teacher in your building responding to that data? You can see how special populations kids are tracked through here, but then also thinking about data walls, student data conferences, and really for us as a school, what this is all about. It's not that I can pull the data up on a report and show that to you. It's more, how am I responding to that data with my practice? How am I responding to that data daily? How am I supporting my colleagues and how they respond to that data? How is it a team effort to make sure every single kid in the building is getting the best education possible with different practices, more innovative practices that we're offering to them? So that's kind of our approach. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just works for us. And that's the cool thing about STEM schools. I don't think any two STEM schools look exactly the same. There's some undercurrents that are there in all of them, but you all have to kind of figure out what fits for your culture, what fits for your building and your demographic. Evidence pieces for this one, I think, and you can kind of see that built-in planning time that's popped up multiple places. So getting those practices in place with your schedule can support you through multiple different attributes. Evidence of kids growing in their data, and then that self-evaluation piece and goal setting. Here we use a SMART goal process. That's a byproduct of being a PLC school, a professional learning community, if you've never heard that acronym. I think my doctoral research was around the PLC model, and how many schools say we're having PLC meetings. The DeFores and Aker and the guys that came up with that, they would tell you, if they were still living, Aker's still living, the DeFores aren't. But anyway, they would tell you that no school should say we are a PLC. You don't have PLC meetings. You're a PLC school, but you have collaborative meetings. So nobody should be saying we're having PLC meetings this week. But a lot of people say that, right? But what I'm saying with that is, out of that process, goal setting, we do the SMART goal process with our kids and our teachers. So that really gives the kids an opportunity to interact with learning they've not experienced yet or they've not mastered yet in a different way. But there's a lot of other opportunities out there for goal setting, different things you can do. The self-evaluation piece would come back to the rubrics that we've talked about too. So just kind of know those evidence pieces, and then some pictures of that. Again, you can see different, this particular school, different artifacts for evidence that they've submitted. They've got goal walls here. They've got some Ames Web data. They've got a spotlight they did in December and January with STEM work, STEM Wall of Fame. So all those different ways you're capturing different data sources in your building. Looking ahead here, moving to STEAM, from STEM to STEAM, not a huge difference, I don't think, but really thinking about how the arts are pulled in, because that's going to make up the A for STEAM. And you can see the two things there. And again, this one's going to be more if you're wanting to pursue the STEAM piece, depending on what level you're at, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. Are you leaving out the arts, or are you trying to figure out a way of how they're kind of bleeding across all the other curriculum, all the other content areas? Wow, that went fast. So that's the end there. You guys didn't ask any questions about the first one. So there's some stuff in the chat, and I don't.
It's all me.
I'm sorry. That's Kristen.
Just been providing some resources.
No, that's great. Thank you. So I guess we'll just kind of, if there's any questions about either attribute, we've still got some time to work through those. So you can raise your hand using your Zoom function, or you can just unmute and ask your questions. Kristen and I both are here to help and support. So if anybody has any questions, now is the time to ask them, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, so again, we've gone over 3 and 4 today. So 3 was talking about professional learning and what that looks like for your teachers, and we've also talked about um, achievement and what that data looks like, all of those kinds of data.
So we had one question about sharing the link to the slides. Those will be shared. I don't know, Kristen, if you want to speak specifically to where that can be located.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was still muted. I'm about to put the actual slide deck in the chat. Um, and we have decided to just wait until our webinar series is finished, just because YouTube is really challenging for TSIN to access on our work laptops. So it would be a lot easier if I can wait till I have all of them. However, if you're needing it for a specific reason, you can absolutely shoot me an email and I can send you just the Zoom link and the passcode. But otherwise, we will upload all of them at once. So we still have one more webinar series to go.
Another question about if we're focusing more on projects or problems when you're thinking about PBLs, really that I think that's up to your school. It's going to be what works in your environment, what maybe works for, if you have dedicated STEM teachers, you know, it would need to be consistent, I would think, amongst those teachers. But like in our context, I mentioned that I expect every teacher in the building to have a little bit of knowledge about STEM. That includes our PE teacher, art teacher, music teacher, librarian, kindergarten teacher, fourth grade teacher. I expect them all to have a component or just an understanding of that. And they're going to have different levels depending on where their passion is, where their experience is. But for us, being elementary school, the problems sometimes can be a little bit more challenging. So a lot of times our work will be more project based, but we have done some problem based too. There's nothing that says you can't do both. It's just a matter of making sure that cohesiveness is there, that collaboration piece is there, so that if you have one kindergarten class doing a project-based learning activity, they should all be doing that. It shouldn't just be done in isolation in that one room. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but really it's going to be what works in your environment.
And I think it's important to note too, Dr. Ford, that both of these lend themselves to really high quality learning. Whether you're doing project or problem based, both of them are going to lead to positive student outcomes. Just because we're doing a project where, you know, our students all might be working towards the same thing, we're still working on their soft skills. We're still getting, them collaborating. So there is no like right or wrong, we do see a lot more project-based learning when it comes to the elementary level, but that's not to say that we don't see it in middle and high school too, because again, both will lend themselves positive student outcomes. Good question, Dr. Ford. How much of your PBL is student-led?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's my internet connection or not. It's a little bit, are y'all sat if you can still hear me?
We can still hear you, but I can see that your picture is a little lagged.
Okay. I'll type in the chat for this one. I'll say what I'm typing. I think I may have cut out. Am I back now?
You're back now.
Sorry about that. Our internet gets a little wanky here. So I think the question was how much of it is student led? Was that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So in our school, it depends on the grade level. A lot of times, I know our fourth grade classes right now are working with a community partner to try to figure out if there's a problem that particular community partner has that the kids could help with. It's a little bit challenging sometimes being in elementary school, but a lot of times it will be, we try to have a balance of teacher led and student led, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I would say maybe 60% student, or no, 60% teacher, 40% student. But again, that's because being in elementary school, and a lot of the learning we've got here is still foundational. You know, you don't know it if you don't know it. And sometimes you just got to have time to teach those foundational skills. Middle school, high school, you could have a lot more flexibility, I think, just because of the age of the kids.
I
That's a good,
think too, it depends on if you're doing project or problem based.
yeah.
I think you're gonna be able to naturally allow allow it to be more student led if it is a problem
Mhm.
versus a project when we assign or provide students with a problem. We really do release the reins, and that can be really hard no matter what grade band or what level that you teach. It can be really hard to let go of the reins because STEM is messy. And it can be really hard to kind of relinquish that control to your students. So, I do think that it's not about doing one more than the other. It truly is about finding a balance. And sometimes it takes some time to build that, letting the rein go and letting your students kind of take control over that. So finding a good balance is a good goal for that.
That's a good point. Any other questions from anybody? Again, you can put them in the chat. You can unmute, raise. Yes, we do allow groups now to come visit since COVID is mostly behind us and all that stuff. We can have people in the building. Our school, that's a fun story. I don't want to go down a rabbit trail with that question, but one of the challenges we faced, and as you get designation and then you decide if you're going to go for redesignation, that's part of the redesignation work is to think about the challenges you faced. But we received designation the year COVID hit. So when we had the site visit in February and then everything shut down in March, if you can remember back then in 2019. So one of the things we had to celebrate was getting designation because we didn't know. There were a lot of unknowns then, but that was a really big thing we had to celebrate, great morale boost. And then we come back the next year and it's like, well, wait a minute. All this stuff we've been doing, the work we've put in, the behaviors we've built, we can't do right now because lockdowns, shutdowns, remote learning, who knows? So it tested the nimbleness of our culture and really thinking through what can we do, what can't we do, how can we, you're thinking about your problem-based learning. There was a lot of problem-based learning for adults in the building and how to work through that thing. And so long story short, to answer your question, yes, we do allow people in the building to visit, whether that's groups wanting to come take tours or what have you. You can just contact me if you're talking about my school, or if you're talking, I'm assuming that's what you mean. But yeah, we'd be happy for a visit. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer. Any other questions from anybody? Got a little bit of time left.
All right, sorry, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.
Okay.